You're going to be learning why disabling JavaScript is no longer viable. I'm Steve, this is TQA Weekly. I've been designing websites for more than 2 decades now. I have a hate-hate relationship with JavaScript ever since the vanilla version. So understand, this episode is from the point of view of somebody who would love to see JavaScript just disappear one day. So, I want you to understand, JavaScript itself is one of the oldest languages alongside with HTML, which is basically a tag language, not really a language. It has always been broken. I know there's a lot of people who love to use it, who think it's perfect. It is broken. It has always been broken. This is why there's so many different iterations, and this is why disabling JavaScript was probably one of the most effective ways of preventing your device from being infected, as well as disabling other plugins. But JavaScript is one of those real big problems when it comes to security because it had more access than it was supposed to. Not as much as ActiveX, but it still had a lot of access. But the thing is that disabling JavaScript now is simply no longer viable. JavaScript as a whole also has different iterations, such as jQuery, which you might actually be aware of. With the advent of the new iterations of JavaScript like jQuery, and the development of frameworks like Bootstrap, websites actually started to be able to become mobile. This allowed different companies to put out a website that could be accessed on smaller devices without the need of an application. And when Google decided if you didn't have a mobile first or mobile ready website, you wouldn't show up on the first page, that forced a lot of websites to start adopting the framework ideology and, of course, became more heavily dependent on JavaScript. The problem with disabling JavaScript is the user experience now. Because much of a mobile design relies on JavaScript, disabling JavaScript ruins a user's experience, meaning that disabling it makes them think the website simply isn't coded right, when we actually are more reliant on JavaScript more now than before. And we no longer do this thing where we are backwards compatible, because that makes the files bigger, and bigger files take longer to download, which has actually been a point of discontent for users who will simply stop the transfer, go back, and go to a website that loads faster. So there is this kind of war where you're trying to stay relevant by keeping a small file size while having a whole bunch of user experience tools that function all the time, which can't if they disable various things in their browser. And that means that whenever you as a user disable JavaScript, what you're actually doing is preventing websites from being used the way they're supposed to. But what are you supposed to do about security? After all, it's still a good way at preventing yourself from being infected. Well, many browsers out there have now adopted a sandbox method, which allows the code to run in a sandbox apart from the computer, and for the most part keeps any malicious malware from ever contaminating your computer. But you're also heavily reliant on search engines like Google scanning websites to tell you they are infected, as well as having your antiviruses on your devices and computers to tell you the website has issues. And that means that you're always going to be in a kind of war where you actually have to update your browsers often to make sure you take full advantage of all the features that are meant to secure your experience while not disabling your user experience at any level whatsoever. So the issue comes down to user experience. The reason why you would disable JavaScript is to protect yourself, but the reason why you can't is your user experience. Because a lot of experts out there also say only allowed to run on websites that you absolutely love. But if you can't navigate a website, you will never fall in love with it. You will never be able to see everything it has to offer. And this still reinforces the idea that you simply can no longer disable JavaScript, at least in any meaningful way that would allow you to use it properly. So basically, we're down to using sandboxing and updating our browsers as opposed to telling people to disable JavaScript. Because we now know that with all these great big pushes, as well as frameworks that are more heavily reliant on JavaScript, We simply can no longer tell people to protect themselves by disabling something when we have told the developers that if they don't do it, they won't show up at all in a search engine. So I hope you understand why disabling JavaScript simply is no longer viable. Sorry. So like this episode if you like it, dislike it if you didn't, share with those that you think can benefit from this, and don't forget to subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions for topics, email me at ask@tqaweekly.com or go to my website, tqaweekly.com, where you can see show notes on this episode, past others, find other ways of subscribing, and of course use the contact form to email me directly. And if you want to see me play video games, head over to twitch.tv/zaxis1981, where I play every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday evening. Thank you for watching, and good night.